at him! He doesn't belong in first class!
Ladies and gentlemen, we're returning to the gate. There's been an incident that requires my immediate attention. The
Nhìn cậu
words
xem,
crackled
chẳng ra
through
làm
the
sao
cabin
cả.
speakers like
Thật là
lightning
thất
cutting
vọng.
through storm clouds. Flight 447 to London Heathrow shuddered to a violent stop on the JFK tarmac engines, screaming in protest as Captain Miguel Rodriguez slammed the brakes with the force of a man who'd seen enough injustice.
Thank you all for being here
one
tonight.
lifetime.
Together with the Flight Foundation, we
Passengers
embark on this
lurched
journey
forward.
one step at a
Champagne
time.
glasses clinked.
Look at
Designer
him!
purses
He
tumbled
doesn't
from
belong in
overhead
first
compartments.
class!
But in the first-class cabin, all eyes turned toward row 2, where a 17-year-old black teenager sat motionless in seat 2A, his hands folded calmly in his lap, while a well-dressed white woman pointed at him like he was a loaded weapon. She had just accused him of terrorism, on a live stream watched by thousands, with no evidence except the color of his skin and the assumption that he didn't belong in first class. What she didn't know was that the quiet boy she was trying to destroy was about to become the youngest tech entrepreneur in Google's history. What she couldn't have imagined was that her 60 seconds of hatred would trigger a revolution in air travel that would echo across every airline in America. And what she never suspected was that the captain now walking down the aisle toward them had lost his own brother to the exact same kind of racial profiling she was attempting. Before we dive into this story that broke the internet and changed airline policy forever, where are you watching from? Drop your city below. And if you believe respect should be standard at any altitude, smash that subscribe button. Because what you're about to witness isn't just about one flight. It's about the moment an entire industry decided that dignity matters more than dollars. This story exploded across every social media platform in real time. The hashtag Flight 447 trended worldwide. The video footage was viewed over 50 million times in the first week. News outlets from CNN to BBC covered it as breaking news. But behind the viral moment was something deeper. A quiet act of courage from a teenager who refused to be intimidated. A captain who chose justice over convenience. And a woman whose assumptions cost her everything she thought made her superior. The rain hammered against the reinforced windows of Terminal 4 like angry fists demanding attention. Inside the exclusive Admiral's Club lounge, crystal champagne flutes clinked softly against mahogany tables, while CNN played silently on mounted screens. Outside, lightning split the gray November sky, but inside the storm brewing was far more dangerous. Flight 447 was already delayed 2 hours due to weather. Passengers checked their watches, tapped their phones, and muttered complaints about missed connections. The London Tech Summit would begin in 14 hours, and some of the most powerful names in Silicon Valley were aboard this flight. None of them realized they were about to witness something that would overshadow every presentation at the conference. The teenager in the corner booth didn't look like he belonged among the tech moguls and hedge fund titans. His black hoodie was faded from too many wash cycles. His jeans had a small tear near the left knee. His white Converse sneakers were scuffed and worn, but his fingers moved across the laptop keyboard with the precision of a concert pianist, lines of code flowing down the screen like digital poetry. His name was Devon Martinez, 17 years old. Mixed heritage, black and Hispanic, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts at a hospital in Queens to pay for his coding classes. Devon had never flown first class before. He'd never flown anywhere before, actually. But 3 days ago, an email had arrived that changed everything. Google wanted to acquire his artificial intelligence app for $2.3 million. They were flying him to London to announce the deal at the summit. He would be the youngest entrepreneur in the company's history. Across the lounge, Victoria Ashford sat rigid in a cream leather chair, her manicured fingers wrapped around a glass of Dom Perignon like it was a weapon. At 52, she carried herself with the practiced arrogance of someone who'd never been told no without immediately demanding to speak to a manager. Her Chanel suit probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her Hermes bag certainly did. She was the wife of pharmaceutical CEO Richard Ashford, and she'd spent the last 25 years perfecting the art of looking down on people. Victoria had been watching Devon for 30 minutes. She'd seen him typing on his computer. She'd noticed the way staff members treated him with the same courtesy they showed everyone else. It bothered her. In her world, respect was earned through net worth and family connections. This boy had neither, which meant he was either lying about his ticket or someone had made a terrible mistake. She pulled out her phone and opened the camera app. If this boy was trying to scam his way into first class, she would document it. She would expose him. She would make sure he faced consequences for his audacity. Because Victoria Ashford had never met a problem she couldn't solve by speaking to someone in charge. Thunder rolled across the airport like a warning. But inside the lounge, the only sound was the soft clicking of laptop keys and the quiet rage of a woman who'd spent her entire life believing that appearance determined worth. In 47 minutes, Flight 447 would begin boarding. In 53 minutes, Victoria would learn that assumptions could be more dangerous than any storm. And in exactly 1 hour and 8 minutes, a 17-year-old boy would teach the entire world that dignity isn't something you buy with a first-class ticket. It's something you earn by how you treat other human beings. The storm outside was just beginning, but the storm inside the cabin of Flight 447 would change everything. Devon Martinez closed his laptop and checked his phone for the 15th time in 10 minutes. 3 missed calls from Mom, 2 text messages from his best friend Marcus, asking if he was really flying to London, and 1 email marked urgent from his guidance counselor Ms. Rodriguez, who still couldn't believe one of her students was about to become a millionaire before graduation. The last text from his mother made his chest tighten. "Baby, remember what we talked about. Keep your head up, speak clearly, and don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong. You earned this. I love you." Devon had earned it. 3 years of coding until his eyes burned. 3 years of turning down parties and basketball games to debug algorithms. 3 years of believing that if he just worked hard enough, smart enough, perfectly enough, the world would judge him by his talent instead of his skin color. His app Code Bridge was designed to help kids from underserved communities learn programming through interactive storytelling. It had started as a class project, then a local coding competition, then a regional showcase. Now Google's AI division wanted to integrate it into their educational platform and make Devon the youngest technical advisor in the company's history. The envelope in his backpack contained the official acquisition offer. $2.3 million plus stock options, plus a full-ride scholarship to Stanford if he wanted it. Devon had read the letter so many times he'd memorized every word, but he still couldn't quite believe it was real. He glanced around the lounge. Business executives in $1,000 suits typed on phones. Tech entrepreneurs debated market strategies over martinis. Investment bankers laughed about deals that moved millions with a signature. Devon wondered if any of them had ever coded for 16 hours straight in a bedroom they shared with their little sister. If any of them had ever used a library computer because their laptop crashed and they couldn't afford repairs. If any of them understood what it meant to carry your family's dreams on your shoulders at 17 years old. Across the lounge, Victoria Ashford was conducting her own form of research. She'd Googled first-class scam and airline fraud and was reading articles about people who used fake boarding passes to upgrade illegally. She'd screenshotted photos of Devon and was already composing an email to airline security describing a suspicious individual who was clearly out of place in the premium lounge. Victoria's own first-class ticket had been purchased without a second thought. She flew to London 3 times a year for charity galas and shopping expeditions. Richard's pharmaceutical company had private jets, but Victoria preferred commercial first class for the service and attention. She enjoyed being recognized by flight attendants. She liked the way other passengers looked at her with envy or respect. Flying first class wasn't just about comfort for Victoria, it was about status. It was about knowing that she belonged in spaces where others didn't. Which was why Devon's presence bothered her so deeply. He disrupted her understanding of how the world worked. In Victoria's universe, first-class passengers looked a certain way. They dressed a certain way. They carried themselves with the confidence that comes from generational wealth and exclusive education. This boy violated every assumption she'd ever made about who deserved luxury and who didn't. She watched him check his phone again and noticed the way his shoulders hunched slightly like he was trying to make himself smaller. Good, she thought. He should feel uncomfortable. He should know he didn't belong. Meanwhile, Captain Miguel Rodriguez was completing his pre-flight inspection in the cockpit of the Boeing 777. At 45, Rodriguez had been flying for major airlines for 20 years. He'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan as a military pilot before transitioning to commercial aviation. He'd flown presidents and prisoners, celebrities and refugees, billionaires and families spending their life savings on a once-in-a-lifetime vacation. Rodriguez had seen every kind of passenger behavior imaginable. He'd handled medical emergencies, weather delays, mechanical issues, and unruly passengers. But the incidents that stayed with him were always the ones involving discrimination. The times when passengers complained about sitting next to someone because of their race or religion. The moments when flight attendants had to intervene because someone decided another passenger didn't look right for their class of service. Those incidents reminded Rodriguez of his brother Carlos, who'd been killed in a police encounter 12 years ago after being wrongfully identified as a suspect. Carlos had been walking home from his job at an electronics store when someone called 911 to report a suspicious Hispanic male in the neighborhood. The responding officers had approached with weapons drawn and assumptions already made. Carlos had died on the sidewalk 3 blocks from his apartment, his work uniform still bearing his name tag. Since then, Rodriguez had made it his personal mission to ensure that his aircraft was a space where every passenger was treated with dignity and respect, regardless of what they looked like or where they came from. He'd helped develop what the airline called the Dignity Protocol, a set of guidelines for handling incidents of passenger discrimination. It wasn't official company policy yet, but Rodriguez had been quietly implementing it on his flights for 6 months. Today, he had a feeling he might need it. The weather radar showed the storm moving east, which meant Flight 447 would likely depart on time despite the earlier delays. Rodriguez reviewed the passenger manifest. Full first-class cabin. Several tech executives traveling to the London summit. 1 passenger listed as VVIP due to age and special circumstances. Devon Martinez, 17 years old, flying alone to represent Google at an international conference. Rodriguez had read the brief memo about Devon's story. The kid had built something revolutionary and was being flown to London to announce a major acquisition. The airline had flagged his reservation to ensure everything went smoothly for such a young passenger on such an important trip. Rodriguez made a mental note to introduce himself to Devon personally before takeoff. In his experience, teenagers traveling alone sometimes needed extra reassurance, especially when they were flying first class for the first time. What he didn't know was that in 2 hours and 37 minutes he would be making the most important decision of his aviation career. As the rain continued to hammer the terminal windows, 3 lives were about to intersect in ways none of them could have predicted. A teenager carrying the dreams of his family and the hopes of his community. A woman whose sense of superiority was about to cost her everything she thought made her special. And a pilot whose commitment to justice would transform an ordinary flight into a moment that changed everything. The boarding announcement was still 20 minutes away, but the countdown to confrontation had already begun. The first sign of trouble came at 6:47 p.m. 43 minutes before boarding was scheduled to begin. Devon had moved to a table near the floor-to-ceiling windows to get better Wi-Fi signal for a video call with his mother. The connection was shaky, but he could see her face pixelated and smiling on his laptop screen. She was in their kitchen in Queens, still wearing her hospital scrubs from her shift. "Baby, you look so handsome," Maria Martinez said, her voice crackling through the speakers. "I wish I could be there to see you get on that plane. You'll see me on the news tomorrow, Mom." Devon laughed, adjusting his laptop screen. "Google's sending a whole camera crew to film the announcement." "My son on television." Maria wiped her eyes. Your abuela would be so proud. She always said you were going to do something special. Devon smiled, but he felt the weight of expectation settling on his shoulders again. His grandmother had died when he was 14, but not before spending countless hours teaching him that education was the only thing no one could ever take away from him. She'd scraped together quarters to pay for his first coding class at the community center. She'd believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. I'm nervous, Mom, Devon admitted, lowering his voice. What if I mess this up? What if I say something wrong? You listen to me. Maria's voice became firm. You belong in that room. You built something amazing. Those people at Google, they need you more than you need them. Don't ever forget that. Across the lounge, Victoria Ashford was eavesdropping on every word. She'd moved to a chair within earshot and was pretending to read Vogue while actually recording the conversation on her phone. In her mind, she was gathering evidence. The boy was clearly lying about his circumstances. No legitimate first-class passenger would be having this kind of conversation in public. No real tech entrepreneur would admit to being nervous about a business meeting. Victoria had been married to a pharmaceutical executive for 25 years. She'd attended countless board meetings, charity galas, and industry conferences. She knew how successful young entrepreneurs behaved. They were confident, polished, articulate. They wore expensive clothes and carried designer accessories. They didn't video chat with their mothers while wearing hoodies in airport lounges. When Devon ended the call and began gathering his things, Victoria made her move. She walked casually toward the window area, pretending to check the weather outside. As she passed his table, she deliberately knocked her Hermes bag into his laptop, causing it to slide toward the edge of the table. Oh my goodness, Victoria gasped, loud enough for other passengers to look over. I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Devon caught his laptop before it could fall and looked up at her with confused but polite eyes. It's fine, ma'am. No damage done. You know, Victoria said, her voice carrying a practiced tone of concern, you might want to be more careful with equipment that isn't yours. Hotels and conference centers can be very strict about damages to loaner computers. The assumption hit Devon like a slap. She thought he was using borrowed equipment. She thought he couldn't afford his own laptop. She was already creating a narrative where he didn't belong in this space. Actually, this is my computer, Devon replied calmly. I built it myself. Victoria's eyes narrowed. The laptop was clearly custom with stickers from coding conferences and programming languages. It was either an elaborate fake or this boy was telling the truth. Neither option fit her predetermined conclusion about who he was. How interesting, she said, her smile becoming sharper. Are you traveling to London for a school trip? The question was loaded with assumptions. School trips meant supervised teenagers. Supervised teenagers didn't fly first class alone. Victoria was fishing for information that would confirm her suspicions about Devon's legitimacy as a premium passenger. I'm going to a tech conference, Devon answered, still polite but beginning to sense the underlying hostility in her questions. A tech conference, Victoria repeated as if she were testing the words for authenticity. How fascinating. What company do you work for? Devon hesitated. The Google acquisition wasn't public yet. He'd signed multiple non-disclosure agreements. He couldn't reveal specific details about the deal or his relationship with the company, but his hesitation read as deception to Victoria, who was already convinced he was lying. I'm not sure I should discuss business details with strangers, Devon said diplomatically. Victoria's face hardened. In her world, evasiveness meant guilt. Legitimate business travelers were proud to discuss their work. Important people name-dropped companies and positions. This boy's reluctance to provide details confirmed every suspicion she'd been nurturing for the past hour. Of course, Victoria said, her voice dripping with false understanding. I completely understand. Confidential information and all that. She walked back to her seat, but her mind was racing. The boy was clearly running some kind of scam. He'd probably stolen the laptop. He'd probably forged his boarding pass. He'd probably targeted this specific flight because he knew it was full of tech executives who might not question a young black face in first class if they assumed he was someone's intern or assistant. Victoria opened her phone and began composing a message to airport security. But as she typed, she realized she had no concrete evidence, no proof of wrongdoing, no documentation of illegal behavior. Just a feeling, just an assumption. Just the absolute certainty that someone like Devon didn't belong in the same space as someone like her. Meanwhile, Devon was experiencing his own growing unease. The woman's questions had been invasive and pointed. Her assumptions had been insulting and obvious. He'd dealt with similar interactions his entire life, but they never got easier. They never hurt less. He thought about his mother's warning. Keep your head up, speak clearly, and don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong. But the truth was, he was starting to feel exactly like he didn't belong. Not because he wasn't qualified or legitimate, but because someone had decided his presence was inherently suspicious. Devon had experienced this feeling in department stores where security guards followed him through aisles. He'd felt it at restaurants where hostesses questioned his reservations. He'd lived with it at school where teachers expressed surprise at his academic performance. The assumption that he was in the wrong place with the wrong resources for the wrong reasons. But this was different. This was supposed to be his moment, his victory, his proof that hard work and talent could overcome any barrier. The fact that someone was questioning his right to be here in this space on this day felt like theft of the highest order. Tech blogger Maria Santos had been watching the entire interaction from her seat near the window. As a Latina journalist who covered Silicon Valley, she'd learned to recognize the subtle dynamics of discrimination in professional spaces. She'd seen the way Victoria approached Devon. She'd heard the loaded questions. She'd witnessed the assumption-making process that could derail careers and damage reputations. Maria opened Instagram and began recording a subtle story showing the lounge with a caption, "Interesting Dynamics at JFK Today." Sometimes the real story isn't the conference, it's how we treat each other on the way there. She didn't tag anyone or mention names, but her followers included thousands of tech industry professionals who would be traveling to London for the same summit. The post would plant a seed of awareness that would bloom into something much larger once the flight took off. The boarding announcement came at exactly 7:30 p.m., cutting through the lounge tension like a bell signaling the start of a boxing match. Flight 447 to London Heathrow is now boarding first and business class passengers at Gate 14. Please have your boarding passes and identification ready. Devon gathered his backpack, laptop, and phone charger. His hands were steady, but his heart was beating faster than normal. He'd been looking forward to this moment for weeks. The moment when he would board his first ever first-class flight and begin the journey that would change his life forever. Victoria gathered her purse scarf and rolling luggage. Her jaw was set with determination. She would board this flight, but she would also ensure that airport security and airline staff were aware of the suspicious individual traveling in first class. She would document everything. She would protect other passengers from what she was certain was an elaborate fraud. Neither of them knew that their interaction in the lounge had been the opening act of a drama that would soon capture the attention of the entire world. As they walked toward Gate 14, Devon pulled out his phone and sent a quick text to his mother, boarding now. "I love you." Victoria opened her camera app and made sure it was ready to record. She had a feeling she would need evidence of what was about to happen. The gate area was crowded with passengers, but the first-class line was short and orderly. Devon and Victoria found themselves standing in queue, just 3 people apart, with only a family of 4 between them. The countdown to confrontation was now measured in minutes, not hours. And somewhere in the cockpit of Flight 447, Captain Miguel Rodriguez was completing his final safety checks, unaware that he was about to make a decision that would define the rest of his career. Gate 14 buzzed with the controlled chaos of international departure. 247 passengers waited in neat lines, first class and business class boarding. First followed by elite status members, then families with children, and finally the general boarding groups. Digital screens displayed flight information in 3 languages. Gate agents checked documents with practiced efficiency. Everything appeared normal. But Devon Martinez could feel the weight of Victoria Ashford's stare on his back like a physical presence. He stood third in the first-class line behind an elderly businessman reading the Financial Times and a young woman talking rapidly in what sounded like German. Devon had his boarding pass folded in his left hand and his driver's license in his right, just as his mother had instructed. He'd watched YouTube videos about first-class boarding procedures. He'd researched airline etiquette. He'd prepared for everything except being treated like a criminal before he even got on the plane. Victoria stood 6 feet behind him, her phone held at waist level with the camera app open and recording. She'd angled it to capture Devon without being obvious about it. In her mind, she was documenting evidence of fraud. In reality, she was creating the first footage of what would become the most viral airline incident in modern history. The line moved forward. The businessman showed his passport and was waved through with a smile. The German woman laughed at something the gate agent said and disappeared down the jet bridge. Devon stepped up to the podium. David Kim, the gate agent, was a soft-spoken man in his early 30s who'd worked for the airline for 8 years. He'd processed thousands of passengers, from celebrities to refugees to excited families beginning once-in-a-lifetime vacations. He treated everyone with the same professional courtesy, regardless of their age, appearance, or destination. "Good evening," David said warmly, accepting Devon's documents. "Flying to London today?" "Yes, sir," Devon replied, his voice steady despite his growing nervousness. David scanned the boarding pass and checked the ID. His computer screen displayed Devon's passenger information, including the VVIP designation that marked him as a special guest of the airline. David had read the brief memo about Devon's story earlier in his shift. Google's youngest entrepreneur flying to announce a major acquisition. The airline wanted to ensure he had an exceptional experience. Mr. Martinez. David said with genuine enthusiasm, "It's a pleasure to have you flying with us today. Seat 2A is one of our best first-class suites. I hope you enjoy the flight." Behind Devon, Victoria's face twisted with confusion and anger. The gate agent was treating this boy like a valued customer, like someone important, like someone who belonged in first class. It made no sense to her. "Thank you," Devon said, accepting his documents back. "I'm pretty excited." "First time in first class?" David asked conversationally. "First time flying anywhere," Devon admitted with a sheepish grin. David's smile widened. "Well, you picked a great flight to start with. The crew will take excellent care of you." Devon walked through the gate and disappeared down the jet bridge. Victoria stepped forward immediately, her phone still recording, though she'd positioned it to look like she was just holding it casually. "Excuse me," Victoria said to David, her voice carrying the authoritative tone of someone accustomed to getting immediate attention. "I need to speak with you about that passenger." David looked up politely. "Is there something I can help you with?" "Mrs. Vance Ashford," Victoria corrected sharply. "Victoria Ashford. And yes, there's definitely something you can help me with. That boy who just boarded. I don't think he should be in first class." David's professional smile remained fixed, but his eyes became more alert. He'd handled passenger complaints before, but something about Victoria's tone set off warning bells in his mind. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Ashford, but I'm not sure what you mean. Mr. Martinez has a valid first-class ticket and proper identification." "I don't care what kind of ticket he has," Victoria said, her voice rising slightly. "I've been watching him in the lounge for over an hour. He doesn't belong there. He was on a video call talking about being nervous about a business meeting. Real executives don't act like that." David felt a chill run down his spine. He'd encountered this type of complaint exactly 3 times in his 8 years with the airline. Each time it had involved a passenger questioning another passenger's right to be in premium class based solely on their appearance or behavior. Each time the complaining passenger had been white and the questioned passenger had been a person of color. Mrs. Ashford David said carefully, "I can assure you that Mr. Martinez's ticket is legitimate. He's actually a special guest of the airline today." Victoria's eyes widened. "A special guest? What does that mean?" David realized he'd said more than he should have. Devon's VVIP status was supposed to be discreet, but Victoria's accusations were forcing him to provide more information than he would normally share with other passengers. "It means he's an important customer and we want to ensure he has an excellent experience with us." Victoria stared at David like he'd spoken in a foreign language. Important customer. Special guest. The words didn't compute with her assumption about who Devon was and why he was there. Important how she demanded. "He's a teenager. He's wearing a hoodie. He was nervous about a business meeting. Important customers don't act like that." David was now in an impossible position. He couldn't reveal details about Devon's private business without violating passenger confidentiality policies. But Victoria's complaints were escalating and other passengers in line were beginning to listen to the conversation. "Ma'am, I really can't discuss one passenger's details with another passenger. I'm sure you understand the privacy concerns." Victoria's face flushed red. Privacy concerns were something other people had to worry about. Not her. Not when she was trying to protect the integrity of first-class service. "Fine," she said, pulling out her phone more obviously. "I'll document this myself. When that boy causes problems on the flight, remember that I warned you." She turned and walked down the jet bridge, her heels clicking aggressively on the metal flooring. David watched her go with growing concern. He'd seen this dynamic play out before. A passenger who'd made assumptions about another passenger and was now committed to proving those assumptions correct regardless of evidence to the contrary. David made a quick decision. He picked up his gate phone and dialed the aircraft directly. "Sarah, it's David at the gate. We might have a situation developing between two first-class passengers. The woman who just boarded Victoria Ashford has been making complaints about the young man in 2A. You might want to keep an eye on the dynamic between them." On the aircraft lead flight attendant, Sarah Thompson made a note on her passenger service list. She'd been flying for 12 years and had developed a sixth sense about passenger conflicts. Most issues could be resolved with careful attention and proactive service, but occasionally personality clashes or preconceived notions created situations that required more active management. Victoria reached the aircraft door and was greeted with Sarah's professional smile. "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Ashford. May I show you to your seat? I'm perfectly capable of finding my own seat," Victoria replied curtly. "But I do need to speak with someone in authority about another passenger." Sarah's internal warning system activated. 2 mentions of passenger conflicts in 30 seconds was unusual. "I'd be happy to address any concerns once we're airborne, Mrs. Ashford. Right now we're focused on getting everyone settled safely." Victoria huffed and walked into the first-class cabin. The Boeing 777's premium section was a masterpiece of luxury design. 8 individual suites arranged in a 1-2-1 configuration, each with a lie-flat seat, 23-inch personal television screen, and sliding privacy door. The cabin was decorated in warm beiges and soft blues, with ambient lighting that made everything look elegant and peaceful. Devon was already in seat 2A, the window suite on the left side of the aircraft. He'd stowed his backpack in the overhead compartment and was looking out the window at the rain-soaked tarmac with wonder in his eyes. His first flight, first time in first class, first time traveling anywhere without his family. Everything was new and amazing. Victoria's seat was 2F across the aisle and 1 row back. She had a clear view of Devon's suite, which meant she could monitor his behavior throughout the flight. She settled into her seat and immediately opened the privacy door that would normally provide separation between passenger suites. "Excuse me," Victoria called loudly across the aisle. "Young man." Devon looked over, surprised to be addressed by a fellow passenger. "Yes, ma'am. I'm curious about something," Victoria said, her voice carrying clearly through the cabin. "How did you end up in first class today?" The question was innocent enough on the surface, but Devon could hear the suspicion underneath it. Other passengers were beginning to board and file past them. A few looked over curiously at the conversation happening between the teenager in the hoodie and the well-dressed woman who was questioning him like a prosecutor. "I bought a ticket," Devon answered, simply turning back toward the window. "Bought it yourself?" Victoria pressed. "Or did someone buy it for you?" Devon felt heat rising in his cheeks. The question was invasive and inappropriate. No one had questioned the businessman's ticket. No one had interrogated the German woman about how she'd paid for her seat. But somehow his presence required explanation and justification. "I don't think that's really your business," Devon said politely but firmly. Victoria smiled with the satisfaction of someone who'd just proven her point. Legitimate passengers didn't evade simple questions. Important customers didn't get defensive about normal conversation. This boy's refusal to provide details confirmed everything she'd been thinking since the lounge. "You're right," she said, pulling out her phone. "It's not my business, but I think it might be someone else's business very soon." Devon turned to look at her fully for the first time, and what he saw in her eyes made his stomach drop. It wasn't curiosity or even skepticism. It was contempt. Pure undisguised contempt for his presence in this space. He'd seen that look before, but never from someone who was about to be trapped in a metal tube with him for 8 hours. Sarah Thompson watched the interaction from the galley with growing concern. The dynamic between these two passengers was already tense, and they hadn't even finished boarding yet. She made another mental note to keep close attention on row 2 throughout the flight. As more passengers filed past them, Devon tried to focus on the excitement of his journey. Google was waiting. The tech summit was waiting. His future was waiting. But Victoria Ashford's stare felt like a weight on his shoulders, a constant reminder that some people would never see his achievements, only his appearance. The confrontation in the lounge had been just the beginning. The real battle was about to unfold at 37,000 feet with nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. The first-class cabin of Flight 447 filled slowly with passengers who carried themselves with the confidence that came from buying the most expensive tickets on the plane. Tech executives scrolled through phones, checking stock prices and email. Investment bankers reviewed presentation slides. Pharmaceutical executives like Victoria's husband Richard made final calls before takeoff, but none of them paid attention to the drama unfolding in row 2, where a 17-year-old boy was about to face the most humiliating experience of his young life. Devon had pulled out his laptop and was running final checks on the presentation he'd give at tomorrow's Google announcement. The acquisition contract was in his backpack, signed and notarized, along with a welcome packet from Google's London office. Everything was legitimate, documented, and legal. But he could feel Victoria's eyes on him like searchlights looking for any excuse to validate her suspicions. Young man Victoria called across the aisle again, her voice louder than necessary. "I couldn't help but notice your laptop. Is that government property?" The question was so absurd that Devon actually laughed. "Government property? No, ma'am, it's mine. It's just very advanced looking," Victoria continued, her voice carrying to passengers in nearby rows. "The kind of equipment that might be issued to employees or interns." Devon realized she was fishing again, trying to get him to admit he was someone's assistant or dependent rather than a legitimate passenger. The assumption was insulting on multiple levels. She couldn't imagine that he might own advanced technology. She couldn't conceive that he might have earned his seat through his own achievements. "I built it myself," Devon said, closing the laptop screen. "For my programming work." "Programming," Victoria repeated as if testing the word for authenticity. "How interesting. What kind of programming does a teenager do?" Sarah Thompson was approaching with the pre-departure beverage service, carrying a silver tray with champagne orange juice and water. She'd been listening to the conversation and didn't like the direction it was heading. Victoria's questions were becoming increasingly invasive and pointed. "Good evening, Mr. Martinez," Sarah said warmly, positioning herself between Devon and Victoria. "Would you like something to drink before we take off?" "Water would be great. Thank you," Devon replied, grateful for the interruption. "And for you, Mrs. Ashford?" Sarah asked, turning to Victoria with a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Champagne," Victoria said curtly. "And I'd like to continue my conversation with the young man across the aisle." Sarah handed Devon his water and Victoria her champagne, but she didn't move away from row 2. Her presence was a subtle signal that she was monitoring the interaction between these passengers. "Actually," Victoria said, raising her voice so other passengers could hear clearly, "I think everyone on this flight deserves to know who they're flying with. Young man, what exactly do you do for a living?" Devon felt every eye in first class turn toward him. The businessman in 1A looked up from his Financial Times. The couple in row 3 paused their conversation. The pharmaceutical executive in 1F glanced over with mild interest. Suddenly, Devon was the center of attention for all the wrong reasons. "I'm a software developer," Devon answered honestly, though he knew the truth was more complicated than that simple description. Software developer Victoria repeated her tone, suggesting she'd caught him in a lie. "At 17, what company employs 17-year-old software developers?" Devon hesitated. He couldn't reveal the Google acquisition publicly. The announcement was scheduled for tomorrow's conference. He'd signed confidentiality agreements. But his silence looked like evasiveness to Victoria and to the other passengers who were now listening intently to their conversation. "I'm not sure I need to discuss my employment details with other passengers," Devon said diplomatically. Victoria's face lit up with triumph. There it is." There it. "He won't say because he can't say. Because there's nothing to say." She turned to address the other first-class passengers directly. "This boy has been lying since the airport lounge. He claims to be a software developer, but he won't name a company. He has expensive equipment, but he won't explain how he afforded it. He's traveling first class, but he acts like he's never been on a plane before." Devon's face burned with embarrassment and anger. Everything Victoria had said was factually true but deliberately misleading. He was a software developer, but not in the traditional sense. He did have expensive equipment, but he'd built it himself with parts he'd saved money to buy. He was traveling first class for the first time because this was the first time anyone had ever paid for him to do so. Ma'am, Devon said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I don't know why you're so interested in my personal business, but I have every right to be on this flight in this seat same as you." "Do you?" Victoria challenged. "Because I think if we looked closely at your ticket, we might find some interesting details about how it was purchased." Sarah Thompson had heard enough. She stepped forward with her authority as lead flight attendant clearly established. "Mrs. Ashford, I'm going to need you to keep your voice down and respect other passengers' privacy. Personal interrogations are not appropriate cabin behavior." Victoria's eyes flashed with anger. "Personal interrogations? I'm trying to protect the safety and security of this flight. This boy is clearly not who he claims to be." "Based on what evidence?" Sarah asked firmly. Victoria gestured toward Devon as if his appearance was evidence enough. "Look at him. Look at how he's dressed. Look at his age. Does he look like someone who belongs in first class?" The words hung in the cabin air like toxic gas. Every passenger in first class heard them clearly. The businessman in 1A shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The couple in row 3 exchanged meaningful glances. The pharmaceutical executive in 1F pulled out his phone and began typing rapidly. Devon felt something inside his chest crack open. All his life he'd been judged by his appearance rather than his abilities. He'd been followed in stores, questioned by teachers, stopped by security guards who assumed he didn't belong wherever they found him. But this was supposed to be different. This was supposed to be his moment of validation, his proof that merit mattered more than assumptions. Mrs. Ashford Sarah said, her voice carrying the weight of 12 years of airline authority, "You are out of line. Mr. Martinez is a valued passenger with a legitimate ticket, and I will not tolerate harassment of any passenger on this aircraft." Harassment. Victoria laughed sharply. "I'm asking reasonable questions about suspicious behavior. If this boy has nothing to hide, he should have no problem answering them." Devon stood up slowly, his hands trembling slightly with controlled rage. He was taller than Victoria had expected, and when he spoke, his voice carried a dignity that surprised everyone in the cabin. "Ma'am, I don't have to prove anything to you. I don't have to justify my presence here or explain how I paid for my ticket or defend my right to exist in the same space as you. The only thing suspicious about this situation is your behavior." Victoria's face turned red. "How dare you speak to me that way? I'm trying to protect everyone on this flight from whatever scam you're running." "What scam?" Devon asked, his voice rising for the first time. "What exactly do you think I'm doing? What crime do you think I'm committing by sitting in a seat I paid for?" "You didn't pay for it," Victoria snapped. "Someone paid for it. Someone you're probably planning to rob or defraud or worse." The cabin fell silent. Victoria had crossed a line from suspicion into outright accusation. She was now suggesting that Devon was planning to commit serious crimes against other passengers. The pharmaceutical executive in 1F was recording the entire conversation on his phone. The businessman in 1A had called for a flight attendant. The couple in row 3 was whispering urgently about whether they should request different seats. Devon felt tears of frustration and anger building behind his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. He would not give Victoria the satisfaction of seeing him break down. Instead, he reached into his backpack and pulled out a folder containing his boarding pass identification and the Google welcome packet. "Here," he said, handing the documents to Sarah. "Check everything. Verify everything. I have nothing to hide." Sarah accepted the documents and reviewed them quickly. Devon's boarding pass showed a legitimate first-class reservation purchased by Google Corporate Travel. His identification confirmed his age and name. The welcome packet contained official Google letterhead welcoming him to London for a confidential business announcement at the Tech Summit. Mrs. Ashford Sarah said firmly, "Mr. Martinez's travel documents are completely legitimate. He is exactly who he says he is, and he has every right to be in first class. I need you to return to your seat and discontinue this harassment immediately." Victoria stared at the documents in Sarah's hands as if they were forgeries. She couldn't reconcile what she was seeing with what she believed about who belonged in first class and who didn't. Rather than accepting that her assumptions had been wrong, she doubled down on her suspicions. "Anyone can fake documents," she said desperately. "Anyone can print fake boarding passes. This proves nothing." The businessman in 1A had had enough. "Lady, what is wrong with you? The kid showed you his papers. The flight attendant verified everything. What more do you want?" "I want the truth," Victoria replied sharply. "I want to know why a teenager in a hoodie is flying first class to London and why everyone is just accepting his story without question." Devon looked around the cabin at the faces of the other passengers. Some looked sympathetic. Others seemed uncomfortable with the confrontation. A few appeared genuinely concerned about Victoria's accusations. But all of them were now part of an incident that was spiraling beyond anyone's control. "You know what Devon said?" His voice cracking slightly. "I'm going to call my mom. Maybe if she explains who I am and where I come from and how hard we've worked for this moment, maybe then you'll believe I deserve to be here." He pulled out his phone and dialed his mother's number. Maria Martinez answered on the first ring. "Baby, are you okay? I saw on the news that flights are delayed," Mom Devon said, putting the phone on speaker so everyone could hear. "Can you please tell the people on my flight who I am? Someone here thinks I'm lying about everything." Maria's voice filled the cabin, warm and proud and unmistakably maternal. "My son is Devon Martinez. He's 17 years old. He's flying to London because Google is buying his app for over $2 million. He's the smartest, kindest, hardest working person I know, and anyone who has a problem with him can go straight to hell. The cabin erupted. The businessman in 1A started applauding. The couple in row 3 cheered. The pharmaceutical executive in 1F shouted, "You tell them, Mama?" Even Sarah Thompson was smiling with genuine emotion. But Victoria Ashford stared at the phone in Devon's hand with pure hatred in her eyes. She had been proven wrong in the most public, humiliating way possible, and rather than accepting her mistake, she decided to make one final desperate play. "Anyone can have someone lie for them on the phone," she said viciously. "This whole thing is an elaborate setup. That woman probably isn't even his mother." The cabin fell silent again. Victoria had just suggested that Devon had orchestrated an elaborate fraud involving fake documents, fake relatives, and fake corporate communications, all to steal a first-class seat on a transatlantic flight. Devon hung up the phone and looked at Victoria with something approaching pity in his eyes. "Ma'am, I feel sorry for you. I really do. Because you're so convinced that people like me don't deserve good things that you'd rather believe in an impossible conspiracy than accept that a black teenager might have earned something you think belongs only to people like you." Victoria stood up abruptly, her face twisted with rage and humiliation. "I want this boy removed from this flight immediately. I want him arrested for fraud. I want him investigated by airport security." She pulled out her phone and began dialing. "I'm calling the police. Let's see how your story holds up when real authorities get involved." Devon sank back into his seat, exhausted and heartbroken. This was supposed to be the best day of his life. Instead, it was becoming one of the worst. But he had no idea that help was already on the way. In the cockpit, Captain Miguel Rodriguez had been monitoring the situation through the aircraft's internal communication system. He'd heard enough of the confrontation to understand exactly what was happening in his first-class cabin. And as a man who had lost his own brother to racial profiling, he was about to take action that would change everything. While Victoria Ashford was dialing 911 to report what she believed was an elaborate fraud, she had no idea that her confrontation with Devon Martinez was already being broadcast live to thousands of viewers across multiple social media platforms. Carlos Rivera, a marketing executive seated in business class, had opened TikTok 30 minutes earlier to document his journey to the London Tech Summit. He was known among his followers for posting behind-the-scenes content from industry conferences, and he'd planned to film some casual travel content during the flight. Instead, he found himself capturing what would become the most viral airline incident in internet history. Carlos had heard the raised voices from first class and quietly moved closer to get a better view. When Victoria began her public interrogation of Devon, Carlos started recording. His TikTok account had 47,000 followers, mostly tech industry professionals and entrepreneurs. Within minutes of posting the first clip, his phone was exploding with notifications. "Y'all, I'm witnessing something incredible on my flight to London right now," Carlos whispered into his phone camera. "This woman in first class is basically harassing this young black kid because she doesn't think he belongs there. This is happening in real time." The first video had been viewed 12,000 times before Victoria even finished calling the police. Comments poured in faster than Carlos could read them. "This is exactly what happened to my nephew at the Marriott. Classic Karen behavior. Post more videos. Someone needs to identify this woman. This is unacceptable. That kid is handling this with more grace than I ever could." Maria Santos, the tech journalist from the airport lounge, had boarded the flight and was seated in business class as well. She'd been following Carlos's TikTok live stream while simultaneously posting her own Twitter thread about the incident. Maria had covered discrimination in Silicon Valley for 5 years, and she recognized the broader significance of what was happening. Thread: currently witnessing racial profiling on Flight 447 to London. Young black teenager being questioned about his right to sit in first class by white woman who demands proof of his legitimacy. This is 2024. This is still happening. Maria's first tweet was retweeted 400 times in 10 minutes. Her followers included tech executives, venture capitalists, and social justice activists who immediately began amplifying the story across their own networks. The pharmaceutical executive in Seat 1F, Dr. James Mitchell, had been recording the confrontation on his phone as well. Unlike Carlos and Maria, who were sharing content in real time, James was documenting everything as potential legal evidence. He'd witnessed clear harassment and discrimination, and he wanted to ensure there was a complete record of Victoria's behavior. When Devon's mother spoke to the cabin over speakerphone, James captured every word. When Victoria accused Maria Martinez of lying about being Devon's mother, James zoomed in on Victoria's face to document her expression. He wasn't planning to post anything publicly, but he was creating a comprehensive video record that would soon become crucial evidence. In Seat 3C Technology, investor Rebecca Kim was live tweeting the incident to her 32,000 followers. Rebecca had made her fortune investing in AI startups, and she was flying to London to announce a major fund focused on underrepresented founders. The irony of witnessing racial discrimination while traveling to promote diversity in tech was not lost on her. Update from 35,000 feet. Watching a young black entrepreneur get interrogated by racist passenger who can't believe he belongs in first class. Plot twist. He's probably more successful than anyone else on this plane. When will this end? Rebecca's tweets were being screenshot and shared to Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Tech industry group chats were buzzing with outrage. The story was spreading beyond social media into private professional networks, where people knew exactly who was flying to London for the summit. The viral explosion reached critical mass when Marcus Thompson Devon's best friend from Queens saw Carlos's TikTok video. Marcus immediately recognized Devon and began sharing the clips to every platform he could access. "Yo, everybody share this. That's my boy Devon getting harassed on that plane. He's flying to London because Google bought his app. This woman is trying to destroy him because she's racist trash. Make this go viral now." Marcus had only 3,000 followers on Instagram, but his post was shared by Devon's other friends, family members, teachers, and community members. The story spread from elite tech circles to working-class neighborhoods in Queens. Devon's high school coding club created a hashtag, Justice for Devon. His church started a prayer chain. His mother's co-workers at the hospital began sharing the videos with their own networks. The convergence of elite tech Twitter and grassroots community organizing created a perfect viral storm. Within 45 minutes of the first TikTok post, Flight 447 was trending in 3 countries. The story had spread across demographic, geographic, and professional boundaries to become a shared moment of collective outrage. But the social media explosion was having real-world consequences aboard the aircraft itself. Victoria Ashford had no idea that her phone call to 911 was being broadcast live to thousands of viewers. She had no idea that her face was being screenshot and shared across every major social media platform. She had no idea that her name was already being researched by internet detectives who were identifying her husband's company and their home address. "I need to report a fraud in progress," Victoria said loudly into her phone. "I'm on Flight 447 at JFK Airport, and there's a teenage boy in first class who is obviously lying about his identity and using stolen documents." Carlos Rivera was recording every word while providing live commentary to his TikTok audience. "Y'all, she's literally calling the police on this kid for existing while black in first class. This is insane." The 911 dispatcher asked Victoria for specific evidence of fraudulent behavior. Victoria struggled to articulate concrete facts, instead repeating her assumptions about Devon's appearance, age, and behavior. "He doesn't look like he belongs in first class," Victoria explained to the dispatcher. "He's dressed inappropriately. He was nervous about a business meeting. He won't provide details about his employer." The dispatcher asked if Victoria had witnessed any actual illegal activity. Victoria hesitated, realizing that she had no evidence of wrongdoing beyond her own suspicions. Well, no, but it's obvious something isn't right. Young people like him don't fly first class unless they're stealing or lying. Carlos's TikTok audience exploded with comments. The viewer count had reached 67,000 and was climbing rapidly. Comments poured in from around the world. Did she just say young people like him? The racism is right there. Someone please tell me the police aren't actually coming. This woman needs to be on every do not fly list in America. That kid is going to sue the airline for allowing this harassment. Meanwhile, Maria Santos had shifted from documenting the incident to actively investigating Victoria's background. Using publicly available information, Maria had identified Victoria as the wife of pharmaceutical executive Richard Ashford. She'd found photos from charity galas and social events showing Victoria at upscale Manhattan gatherings. Update racist passenger has been identified as Victoria Ashford, wife of pharmaceutical executive. This woman lives in a world of extreme privilege and is using it to terrorize a teenager whose only crime is being successful while black. The identification of Victoria Ashford triggered a new wave of viral activity. People began researching her husband's company, Ashford Pharmaceuticals. They found records of the company's legal settlements, regulatory violations, and executive compensation packages. They discovered that Richard Ashford had made controversial statements about healthcare access and pricing. Within an hour, Ashford Pharmaceuticals was receiving hundreds of angry emails and phone calls from people demanding that they address Victoria's behavior. The company's stock price began to decline as news of the incident spread through financial networks. Board members who were traveling to London for unrelated business began receiving urgent messages from their communications teams. But the most significant development was happening in the cockpit of Flight 447, where Captain Miguel Rodriguez was monitoring both the passenger situation and the social media explosion through the aircraft's Wi-Fi network. Rodriguez had access to real-time passenger communications and could see the viral growth of hashtags related to his flight. He could see the TikTok videos, the Twitter threads, and the Instagram posts. He could see that a private passenger dispute had become a global news story, while his aircraft was still sitting on the tarmac. More importantly, Rodriguez could see that Devon Martinez was telling the truth about everything. Social media sleuths had verified his identity, confirmed his Google acquisition deal, and documented his academic achievements. There was no fraud. There was no deception. There was only a 17-year-old boy being terrorized by an adult who couldn't accept his right to succeed. Rodriguez made a decision that would define the rest of his career. He was going to take personal control of this situation, not just as a captain responsible for aircraft safety, but as a man who had watched racial profiling destroy his own family. He picked up the cabin intercom and made an announcement that would soon be heard around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are currently experiencing a passenger disturbance that requires my immediate attention. I will be leaving the cockpit to address this situation personally. We will not be departing until this matter is resolved to my satisfaction. In the first-class cabin, Devon looked up with surprise. He'd never heard of a captain leaving the cockpit to handle passenger disputes. But Victoria Ashford smiled with satisfaction. Finally, someone in authority was taking her concerns seriously. She had no idea that Captain Rodriguez was about to become her worst nightmare. The social media explosion continued to accelerate. The hashtag Flight 447 was now trending globally. News outlets were beginning to pick up the story. Television producers were dispatching crews to JFK Airport. And in the first-class cabin of a Boeing 777 that was still sitting on the ground, a confrontation between two passengers was about to become a defining moment in the fight for dignity and equality in air travel. Carlos Rivera continued his live stream, now addressing nearly 100,000 viewers. Y'all, the captain just announced he's coming back here personally. This is about to get real. This woman has no idea what's coming for her. But neither Carlos nor any of his viewers could have predicted what would happen next. Captain Miguel Rodriguez was about to deliver a lesson in justice that would be remembered long after Flight 447 finally reached its destination. Captain Miguel Rodriguez unbuckled his harness and stood up from the left seat of the Boeing 747's cockpit. In 20 years of commercial aviation, he had left the flight deck during ground operations exactly 7 times, twice for medical emergencies involving passengers, 3 times for mechanical issues requiring his personal inspection, once for a security threat that turned out to be a false alarm, and once for a passenger dispute that reminded him too much of the day his brother Carlos died. Today would be number 8. "Dave, you have the aircraft," Rodriguez told his co-pilot, First Officer David Park. "Monitor ground control and passenger communications. If this situation escalates, be ready to call airport security immediately." "What's the plan?" Cap Park asked, concern evident in his voice. Rodriguez paused at the cockpit door. "Justice," he said simply. "The plan is justice." Rodriguez had been following the passenger disturbance through the aircraft's internal communication system and the social media explosion visible through his cockpit Wi-Fi access. He'd heard Victoria Ashford's accusations. He'd witnessed Devon Martinez's calm responses. He'd watched the viral videos spreading across TikTok and Twitter. Most importantly, he'd verified Devon's identity and Google acquisition story through official airline communications. But Captain Rodriguez's decision to intervene personally wasn't just about passenger safety or airline policies. It was about 12 years of grief, anger, and determination to ensure that what happened to his brother Carlos would never happen to another young man on his watch. Carlos Rodriguez had been 23 when he died, a community college graduate working at an electronics store in Phoenix while saving money to become an electrician. He'd been walking home from work on a Tuesday evening when someone called 911 to report a suspicious Hispanic male in the neighborhood. The responding officers had approached with weapons drawn and assumptions already made. Carlos had died on the sidewalk 3 blocks from his apartment, his work uniform still bearing his name tag, his hands still carrying the electronics textbooks he'd been studying during his lunch break. The official investigation concluded that the officers had acted within policy guidelines. The 911 caller was never charged with filing a false report. Carlos Rodriguez became a statistic in a system that valued assumptions more than evidence, fear more than facts. Miguel Rodriguez had become a pilot partly as a way to honor his brother's memory. Carlos had dreamed of working with electrical systems on aircraft. Miguel fulfilled that dream by learning to fly them instead. Every flight was a tribute to the brother who'd been killed for existing in the wrong place, at the wrong time, in the wrong skin. Now, walking toward the first-class cabin of Flight 447, Rodriguez could see history repeating itself. A young man of color being accused of crimes he hadn't committed by someone who'd decided his presence was inherently suspicious. The only difference was that this time Miguel Rodriguez was in a position to stop it. The first-class cabin fell silent as Captain Rodriguez appeared in the doorway. He was an imposing figure even without his authority as aircraft commander. Tall, broad-shouldered, with graying temples and eyes that had seen too much injustice to tolerate any more. He wore his uniform with the pride of someone who'd earned every stripe, every pin, every privilege that came with 4 gold bars on his shoulders. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "I am Captain Rodriguez, and I will be conducting a personal investigation of the passenger disturbance reported from this cabin." Victoria Ashford stood up immediately, her face lighting up with vindication. Finally, someone with real power was taking her concerns seriously. Someone who would surely recognize that her suspicions about Devon Martinez were justified. "Captain, thank you for coming," Victoria said, her voice dripping with false gratitude. "I've been trying to alert your crew about a serious security concern involving this passenger." She pointed dramatically at Devon, who remained seated and motionless. Rodriguez looked at Victoria for a long moment before responding. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to sit down and remain quiet while I conduct my investigation. Speak only when directly questioned." Victoria's smile faltered. She'd expected immediate support, not instruction to be silent. But she sat down confident that once the captain reviewed the evidence, he would see things her way. Rodriguez turned his attention to Devon, who was looking up at him with a mixture of hope and resignation. The teenager had clearly been through an ordeal, but his composure was remarkable for someone his age under such pressure. Mr. Martinez Rodriguez said formally, "I understand there have been questions about your presence on this flight. I'd like to review your documentation and discuss your travel arrangements." Devon nodded and handed over his folder of documents. Rodriguez examined each item carefully: boarding pass identification, Google welcome packet, acquisition contract, and travel authorization. He also pulled out his phone and made several quick calls to verify Devon's story through official channels. While Rodriguez conducted his investigation, the other first-class passengers watched in fascination. This was far more drama than anyone had expected on a routine transatlantic flight. Carlos Rivera was still live-streaming the entire scene to his TikTok audience, which had grown to over 150,000 viewers. "Y'all, the captain is personally verifying this kid's documents," Carlos whispered into his phone. "This is like CSI First Class. The racist lady is about to get schooled so hard." Dr. James Mitchell, the pharmaceutical executive in seat 1F, was recording everything on his phone as well. As a board member of multiple companies, he understood the potential legal implications of what was happening. Victoria Ashford was creating massive liability for herself, her husband's company, and potentially the airline. Meanwhile, Maria Santos was live tweeting the captain's investigation to her followers, who were sharing updates across every major platform. The story had now been picked up by news outlets, including CNN, NBC, and the BBC. Television producers were dispatching crews to both JFK Airport and London Heathrow to cover the story from both ends. After 15 minutes of investigation, Captain Rodriguez had verified every detail of Devon's story. The Google acquisition was real. The conference invitation was legitimate. The travel arrangements had been made by Google Corporate Travel and approved by airline security protocols. Devon Martinez was exactly who he claimed to be, a 17-year-old entrepreneur flying to London to announce the sale of his company for over $2 million. Rodriguez turned to address the entire first-class cabin, his voice carrying clearly to the business-class passengers who were straining to hear every word. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have completed my investigation of this passenger disturbance. Mr. Devon Martinez is a legitimate passenger with proper documentation and authorization for first-class travel. He is a technology entrepreneur, flying to London at the invitation of Google Corporation to announce a major business acquisition." The cabin erupted in applause. The businessman in 1A started clapping loudly. The couple in row 3 cheered. Dr. Mitchell shouted. Justice Rebecca Kim was live tweeting every word to her followers. But Rodriguez wasn't finished. However, he continued, his voice becoming harder. "I have also determined that Mr. Martinez has been subjected to harassment, discrimination, and false accusations based solely on his race and age. This behavior is unacceptable on my aircraft and will not be tolerated under any circumstances." Victoria Ashford's face went white. The captain wasn't supporting her position. He was condemning it. She stood up abruptly, her voice shaking with anger and disbelief. "Captain, you don't understand," she protested. "That boy doesn't belong in first class. Look at him. Look at how he's dressed. Look at his age." "He's obviously lying about something." Rodriguez turned to face Victoria directly, and his expression was terrifying in its controlled fury. "Ma'am, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Mr. Martinez belongs in first class because he purchased a first-class ticket and has every legal right to use it. His clothing is completely appropriate for air travel. His age is irrelevant to his status as a paying passenger. And the only person on this aircraft who has been lying is you." Victoria stared at him in shock. "Lying? I haven't lied about anything. You called airport security and claimed Mr. Martinez was committing fraud. That was a lie. You told other passengers he was using stolen documents. That was a lie. You suggested he was planning to rob or assault other passengers. That was also a lie. You have made false accusations against an innocent person based solely on racial prejudice. The cabin was dead silent. Even Carlos Rivera's TikTok audience had stopped commenting, watching in stunned amazement as a commercial airline captain delivered a lesson on racism and justice at 37,000 feet. Rodriguez wasn't finished. Ma'am, I need to inform you that your behavior tonight has been recorded by multiple passengers and is currently being broadcast live to thousands of viewers on social media. Your false accusations against Mr. Martinez constitute harassment and potentially criminal defamation. Your attempt to have him removed from this flight based on racial profiling is a violation of federal civil rights laws. Victoria's face cycled through shock, anger, and growing panic. She'd had no idea that the confrontation was being filmed and shared online. She'd assumed this was a private dispute between passengers that would end with the removal of the teenager she'd decided didn't belong. "This is ridiculous," Victoria said desperately. "I'm a valued customer of this airline. My husband is Richard Ashford of Ashford Pharmaceuticals. We fly first class regularly. I shouldn't have to sit next to suspicious individuals just because they claim to have legitimate tickets." Rodriguez stepped closer to Victoria, his voice dropping to a level that was somehow more threatening than if he'd been shouting. "Ma'am, I don't care if your husband owns this entire airline. I don't care if you've flown first class 1,000 times. I don't care about your last name or your bank account or your social connections. What I care about is the fact that you have spent the last hour terrorizing a 17-year-old boy because you couldn't accept that a young black man might have earned something you think belongs only to people like you." The truth of Rodriguez's words hung in the cabin air like a judgment. Victoria had been exposed not just as wrong about the facts, but wrong about her fundamental assumptions about who deserved respect and who didn't. Devon Martinez, who had remained silent throughout the captain's investigation, finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but carried clearly through the cabin. "Captain, I appreciate you standing up for me, but I don't want to cause any more problems. If it would make the flight more peaceful, I'm happy to move to a different seat." Rodriguez turned to look at Devon with something approaching admiration. Even after being humiliated and falsely accused, the teenager was still trying to avoid conflict and make things easier for everyone else. It was exactly the kind of grace under pressure that Rodriguez's brother Carlos had shown in the moments before his death. Mr. Martinez Rodriguez said firmly, "You will not be moving to a different seat. You paid for seat 2A, and seat 2A is where you belong. Anyone who has a problem with that is welcome to find alternative transportation." Rodriguez then addressed the entire cabin one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, this flight will not depart until I am satisfied that every passenger can travel in safety and dignity. Mr. Martinez has done nothing wrong and will face no further harassment. Anyone who cannot accept those terms is free to leave this aircraft immediately." The message was clear. Victoria Ashford could either apologize and behave appropriately for the remainder of the flight, or she could be removed from the aircraft and find her own way to London. But Victoria Ashford was about to make a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Rather than accepting that she'd been wrong, rather than apologizing for her behavior, rather than learning from the captain's lesson about dignity and respect, she was about to double down on her racism in the most spectacular way possible. And Captain Miguel Rodriguez was about to respond with a level of justice that would be remembered long after Flight 447 reached its destination. Victoria Ashford stood in the aisle of the first-class cabin, her Chanel suit wrinkled from stress, her carefully styled hair disheveled from running her hands through it, her face flushed red with anger and humiliation. She had reached the moment that would define the rest of her life, though she didn't know it yet. Captain Rodriguez had given her a choice: accept that she was wrong and allow the flight to proceed peacefully, or continue her harassment and face the consequences. For a rational person, the choice would have been obvious. Devon Martinez had been vindicated completely. His documents were legitimate. His story was true, and his presence in first class was entirely appropriate. But Victoria Ashford had never been forced to confront her own prejudices so directly, so publicly, with such devastating consequences. Her entire worldview was built on the assumption that appearance determined worth, that privilege was earned rather than inherited, and that people like Devon simply didn't belong in spaces like first class. Rather than accepting that her assumptions were wrong, Victoria decided to make one final desperate play. She would force everyone to see what she saw. She would make them understand that this boy was dangerous regardless of what his paperwork said. Victoria pulled out her phone and began dialing 911 again, this time with her voice raised loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "I need to report an emergency on Flight 447 at JFK Airport," she announced dramatically. "There is a terrorist on this aircraft and the crew is refusing to remove him." The word terrorist cut through the cabin like a knife through silk. Conversation stopped. Passengers froze. Even Captain Rodriguez, who had seen almost every kind of passenger behavior imaginable, was stunned by the escalation. Devon Martinez felt the blood drain from his face. He had been accused of many things in his 17 years, being too smart for his own good, being too ambitious for someone his age, being too confident for someone from his neighborhood. But no one had ever accused him of terrorism. The word felt like a physical blow. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying a warning that would have stopped any reasonable person, "I strongly advise you to end that phone call immediately." But Victoria was beyond reason now. She was running on pure adrenaline desperation and the kind of racial panic that had been programmed into her by decades of assumptions about who was dangerous and who wasn't. "This boy has been acting suspiciously since the airport." Victoria continued into her phone, her voice carrying clearly to passengers in business class. "He has advanced computer equipment that could be used for hacking. He won't reveal details about his employer. He was nervous and evasive when questioned, and now the crew is protecting him instead of protecting the other passengers." Carlos Rivera, who had been live streaming the entire confrontation to his TikTok audience, felt his hands shaking as he held his phone. His viewer count had reached over 200,000 people, many of whom were recording his stream and sharing it across other platforms. Victoria's terrorism accusation was being broadcast live to hundreds of thousands of viewers around the world. "Y'all," Carlos whispered into his phone, "this woman just accused this teenager of being a terrorist on a live stream. This is the most insane thing I've ever seen." Dr. James Mitchell, who had been documenting the incident for legal purposes, realized he was now recording potential evidence in a federal hate crime case. False terrorism accusations against minorities were prosecuted aggressively by federal authorities, especially when they occurred on aircraft or in airports. Maria Santos was live tweeting every word to her growing audience of tech industry followers, many of whom recognized the broader implications of what was happening. Victoria wasn't just attacking Devon personally. She was attacking the idea that young people of color could be successful in technology, could earn their places in elite spaces, could be judged by their achievements rather than their appearance. But the most significant reaction was happening in the cockpit, where First Officer David Park was monitoring communications from air traffic control, airport security, and federal law enforcement agencies. Victoria's 911 call was being taken seriously by multiple agencies, which meant Flight 447 was now the subject of an active security investigation. Cap Park's voice crackled through Rodriguez's earpiece. "We've got FBI, TSA, and Port Authority responding to a terrorism report. They're treating this as a credible threat until proven otherwise." Rodriguez felt a cold fury building in his chest. Victoria Ashford had just weaponized the entire federal security apparatus against a 17-year-old boy whose only crime was succeeding while black. Her false accusation would trigger investigations, background checks, and security protocols that could haunt Devon for years. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying absolute authority, "I am ordering all passengers to remain seated while we address this security situation. No one will be leaving this aircraft until further notice." Victoria smiled with satisfaction. Finally, the captain was taking her concerns seriously. Finally, the authorities would investigate this suspicious boy and vindicate her suspicions. She had no idea that she had just committed multiple federal crimes in front of hundreds of thousands of witnesses. Devon Martinez sat motionless in his seat, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes closed as if he were praying. He could hear sirens approaching the aircraft. He could see emergency vehicles positioning themselves outside the windows. He could feel the stares of every passenger in first and business class. This was supposed to be the best day of his life. Tomorrow he would stand on a stage in London and announce that Google had acquired his app for over $2 million. He would become the youngest entrepreneur in the company's history. He would prove that kids from Queens could compete with anyone from anywhere. Instead, he was about to be investigated as a potential terrorist because a wealthy woman couldn't accept that he belonged in the same space as her. Devon pulled out his phone and sent a quick text to his mother. "Mom, there might be some news stories about me tonight. Don't worry, I'm okay. I love you." Maria Martinez was working her evening shift at Queens General Hospital when her phone started buzzing with notifications. First a text from Devon, then calls from reporters, then messages from neighbors who had seen the viral videos. By the time she understood what was happening, her son's face was trending on social media and FBI agents were boarding his flight. Meanwhile, Victoria's phone call to 911 had triggered a cascade of responses that she never could have anticipated. The Joint Terrorism Task Force had been notified. The Transportation Security Administration was deploying additional agents. The Federal Bureau of Investigation was scrambling resources to JFK Airport. But most significantly, Victoria's false terrorism accusation was being reviewed in real time by federal prosecutors who specialized in hate crimes and civil rights violations. Her phone call was recorded. Her accusations were documented. And the evidence that Devon was completely innocent was overwhelming and publicly available. The aircraft door opened and federal agents began boarding Flight 447. The lead agent was Special Agent Sarah Williams of the FBI's Civil Rights Division, a woman who had spent 15 years investigating cases of racial discrimination and bias-motivated crimes. "I'm Special Agent Williams," she announced to the cabin. "We're here to investigate a reported security threat. I need everyone to remain calm and cooperative while we sort this out." Victoria stood up immediately, pointing toward Devon with renewed confidence. "Agent Williams, thank you for responding so quickly. The terrorist is right there in seat 2A. I've been trying to warn everyone for over an hour." Agent Williams looked at Victoria with the expression of someone who had seen this exact scenario too many times before. A wealthy white woman making terrorism accusations against a young person of color based on nothing but racial assumptions and social panic. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to sit down and remain quiet while I conduct my investigation. False reports of terrorism are federal crimes punishable by up to 5 years in prison." Victoria's confidence wavered for the first time. She had expected the FBI to arrest Devon immediately. She had expected vindication and gratitude for her vigilance. She had not expected to be warned about criminal liability for her own actions. Agent Williams approached Devon's seat and spoke in a calm, professional tone. "Mr. Martinez, I'm Special Agent Williams with the FBI. I need to ask you some questions about your travel today." Devon nodded, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Yes, ma'am. I'm happy to cooperate. Can you tell me the purpose of your travel to London? I'm attending the TechCrunch Disrupt conference to announce that Google is acquiring my artificial intelligence company." Agent Williams raised an eyebrow. She'd been briefed on the basic facts during her drive to the airport, but hearing Devon's story directly was still remarkable. "How old are you, Mr. Martinez?" 17, ma'am. "And Google is acquiring your company for how much money? $2.3 million plus stock options and a scholarship to Stanford." Agent Williams looked around the first-class cabin, taking in the scene. A 17-year-old entrepreneur flying to announce a multi-million-dollar acquisition. A wealthy socialite who had accused him of terrorism. Passengers recording everything on their phones. Captain Rodriguez standing in the aisle with the bearing of someone who had reached the absolute limit of his patience. Mr. Martinez, Agent Williams, said formally, "I've reviewed your documentation and verified your story through multiple sources. You are clearly not a security threat. In fact, you appear to be exactly who you say you are, a remarkable young entrepreneur on his way to make history." The cabin erupted in applause again. Devon felt tears of relief building behind his eyes. The FBI had vindicated him. The nightmare was finally over. But Agent Williams wasn't finished. She turned to face Victoria Ashford with an expression that would have frozen fire. "Mrs. Ashford, you are under arrest for making false statements to federal authorities regarding acts of terrorism. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The color drained from Victoria's face. Arrest. But I was trying to protect everyone. I was reporting suspicious behavior. "Ma'am, you accused an innocent teenager of terrorism based solely on his race and age. You wasted federal law enforcement resources investigating a completely baseless claim. You attempted to weaponize the justice system against a minor because you didn't think he belonged in first class." Agent Williams began handcuffing Victoria while reading her full Miranda rights. The entire process was being recorded by multiple passengers and broadcast live to hundreds of thousands of viewers worldwide. Victoria looked around the cabin, desperately searching for support from other passengers. But the businessman in 1A was shaking his head in disgust. The couple in row 3 was whispering angrily about her behavior. Dr. Mitchell was still recording everything for potential legal proceedings. "This is a mistake," Victoria protested as Agent Williams led her toward the aircraft door. "My husband is Richard Ashford of Ashford Pharmaceuticals. I'm not a criminal. I was trying to do the right thing." "Ma'am," Agent Williams replied, "doing the right thing would have been treating Mr. Martinez with the same respect you'd want for your own children. Instead, you chose to terrorize a teenager because you couldn't accept his success." As Victoria was led off the aircraft in handcuffs, Devon Martinez stood up and spoke in a voice that carried clearly through the cabin and into Carlos Rivera's live stream. "I forgive you, Mrs. Ashford. I hope someday you'll understand that people like me aren't your enemy. We're just trying to build a better world for everyone." The grace and maturity in Devon's response left the entire cabin speechless. Here was a 17-year-old boy who had been falsely accused of terrorism, who had been humiliated in front of hundreds of passengers who had watched his dream day turn into a nightmare offering forgiveness to the woman who had tried to destroy him. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward and placed a hand on Devon's shoulder. "Son, you've shown more character in the last 2 hours than most people show in a lifetime. It would be my honor to personally ensure you get to London safely." As FBI agents finished their investigation and departed the aircraft, the passengers of Flight 447 began to process what they had witnessed. They had seen the worst of human nature in Victoria's racism and false accusations, but they had also seen the best of humanity in Devon's dignity, Captain Rodriguez's courage, and Agent Williams's commitment to justice. Carlos Rivera ended his TikTok live stream with a message to his viewers. "Y'all just witnessed history. Not just because of the drama, but because of how that young man handled it. That's how you respond to hate, with grace, with dignity, and with forgiveness." The viral storm continued to grow. Flight 447 was now trending globally. News outlets were updating their coverage in real time, and somewhere in Queens, Maria Martinez was crying with pride as she watched her son teach the entire world how to turn hatred into hope. Flight 447 was finally ready for departure, but the lessons learned in first class would last much longer than the 8 hours it would take to reach London. As Flight 447 finally pushed back from Gate 14 at JFK Airport, the world outside was already transforming in ways that none of the passengers could have imagined. The viral videos of Victoria Ashford's arrest were being viewed millions of times across every social media platform. The story had exploded beyond the tech industry into mainstream news coverage that would dominate headlines for weeks. But the immediate consequences were unfolding in real time as Devon Martinez settled into his first-class seat for what had become the most scrutinized flight in aviation history. Devon pulled out his phone as the aircraft began taxiing toward the runway. He had 847 missed calls, 341 text messages, and social media notifications that had crashed 3 different apps. His mother had been trying to reach him for 2 hours. His best friend Marcus was calling every 30 seconds. His high school principal had left 17 voicemails. The first text he opened was from his mother. "Baby, I've been watching the news. The whole world is talking about you. I'm so proud of how you handled everything. You showed them who raised you right." Devon smiled for the first time in 3 hours and typed back, "Love you, Mom. Can't wait to tell you everything when I get home." Captain Rodriguez's voice came over the cabin intercom as Flight 447 reached its cruising altitude. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I want to personally thank all of our passengers for your patience during tonight's unusual circumstances. I also want to recognize Mr. Devon Martinez in Seat 2A, who demonstrated the kind of grace and maturity that makes me proud to be his captain tonight. Mr. Martinez, the crew and I look forward to celebrating your success in London." The cabin burst into applause again. Devon waved shyly as passengers turned to look at him with admiration rather than suspicion. The transformation was complete. He had gone from being treated as a threat to being celebrated as a hero, all within the space of 3 hours. But while Devon was finally able to enjoy his first-class experience, Victoria Ashford was beginning the worst night of her life in a holding cell at the Port Authority Police Headquarters. She sat on a metal bench in an orange jumpsuit, her designer clothes confiscated as evidence, her Hermes bag sealed in a plastic bag labeled personal property. She had been fingerprinted, photographed, and processed like any other criminal suspect. The contrast with her normal life of privilege and luxury was jarring enough to break through her delusions about who she really was. Victoria's first phone call had been to her husband Richard, but it had not gone as she expected. Richard Ashford had spent the evening watching his wife being arrested on live television while his pharmaceutical company's stock price plummeted and his board of directors demanded emergency meetings about the PR crisis. "Richard, you have to get me out of here," Victoria pleaded into the jailhouse phone. "This is all a misunderstanding. I was trying to protect people." Victoria Richards' voice was cold and distant. "I've just spent 4 hours in emergency meetings with our legal team, our PR department, and our board of directors. Our stock is down 12%. We're getting death threats. Protesters are gathering outside our headquarters, and it's all because you decided to racially profile a teenager on live television." Victoria felt her world collapsing. But I was right to be suspicious. That boy didn't belong in first class. Victoria, that boy is about to become one of the youngest tech entrepreneurs in Google's history. His acquisition deal is worth more than most of our executives make in their entire careers. You didn't attack a fraud. You attacked success. And you did it in the most public, humiliating way possible. The conversation ended with Richard informing Victoria that he was filing for divorce and that she would need to find her own legal representation for the federal charges she was facing. Meanwhile, the viral explosion was having real-world consequences far beyond Victoria's personal life. Ashford Pharmaceuticals was facing a corporate crisis that threatened the company's reputation and financial stability. Social media activists had organized boycotts of the company's products. Medical professionals were questioning whether they could continue prescribing medications manufactured by a company associated with such blatant racism. The company's board of directors held an emergency meeting at 2 a.m. and voted unanimously to terminate Richard Ashford as CEO effective immediately. The board also issued a public statement condemning Victoria's behavior and announcing a $10 million donation to organizations fighting racial discrimination in aviation and technology. But the most significant immediate consequence was the policy change that Captain Rodriguez announced during Flight 447's descent into London Heathrow Airport. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain with an important announcement. Based on tonight's events, our airline is implementing an immediate change to our passenger service policies. We are formally adopting what we're calling the Dignity Protocol, which provides clear guidelines for handling incidents of passenger discrimination. Every crew member will receive additional training on recognizing and addressing racial profiling. And any passenger who harasses another passenger based on race, ethnicity, religion, or national origin will be permanently banned from our airline. The announcement was recorded by passengers and shared widely on social media. Within 24 hours, 17 other major airlines had announced similar policies. The Dignity Protocol became an industry standard that transformed how airlines handled discrimination complaints. As Flight 447 touched down at London Heathrow, Devon Martinez looked out the window at the city where he would make history in just a few hours. But he was already thinking beyond his Google announcement to the larger impact of what had happened. Devon had received dozens of messages from young entrepreneurs around the world who had been inspired by his story. High school students who had seen his videos were sharing their own coding projects. College students were starting companies based on ideas they'd developed after watching his example. The true power of Devon's story wasn't just that he had succeeded despite facing discrimination. It was that he had responded to hatred with dignity, to false accusations with truth, and to attempts at destruction with forgiveness. When Devon deplaned at Heathrow, he was met by a Google executive team that included the company's CEO, who personally welcomed him to London and praised his handling of the incident. Devon, you've already shown us that you have the character to represent Google on the world stage. We're honored to be working with you. The press conference announcing Devon's acquisition was covered by news outlets from around the world, but most of the questions were about his experience on Flight 447, rather than his technical achievements. Devon used every interview opportunity to talk about the importance of giving young people chances to succeed, regardless of their background. Mrs. Ashford made assumptions about me based on how I looked rather than who I am. Devon told a reporter from the BBC, "But I don't want this to be about her. I want it to be about all the kids who look like me and think they can't achieve their dreams." Tonight proved that if you work hard enough and believe in yourself enough, no one can stop you. Victoria Ashford was released on bail 2 days later, but her legal troubles were just beginning. She faced federal charges for making false terrorism reports, potential civil lawsuits from Devon and his family, and a criminal investigation into whether her actions constituted a hate crime under federal law. More personally devastating was the complete collapse of her social world. Her country club revoked her membership. Her charity boards asked for her resignation. Friends stopped returning her calls. The woman who had built her identity around exclusivity and status found herself excluded from every elite circle she had once dominated. But the most lasting consequence of Flight 447 was the conversation it started about dignity, respect, and the assumptions we make about who belongs in which spaces. Devon's story became a case study in business schools, a topic of discussion in diversity training programs, and a reminder that success can come from any background if given the opportunity. As Devon prepared for his presentation at the TechCrunch Disrupt conference, he reflected on the journey that had brought him from a bedroom in Queens to a stage in London. The hardest part hadn't been learning to code or building his company or negotiating with Google. The hardest part had been maintaining his dignity when someone tried to take it away from him. But he had done it. And in doing so, he had shown the world that true first-class treatment had nothing to do with the price of your ticket, and everything to do with how you chose to treat other human beings. Flight 447 had finally reached its destination. But the lessons learned at 37,000 feet would continue to resonate long after the passengers had gone home. 3 months after Flight 447 became the most viral airline incident in Internet history, Devon Martinez stood backstage at the London Tech Summit, adjusting his navy suit jacket and checking his presentation notes one final time. The main auditorium was packed with 2,000 technology executives, venture capitalists, and entrepreneurs from around the world. But tonight felt different from any tech conference he'd attended in the past. Tonight, Devon wasn't just announcing a product launch or sharing coding techniques. Tonight, he was delivering a keynote speech about building bridges technology as a force for dignity and inclusion. 5 minutes to stage time. Mr. Martinez, the event coordinator, announced, but Devon barely heard her. His phone was buzzing with messages from supporters around the world who were watching the live stream. His mother was watching from Queens, surrounded by neighbors and family members who had gathered to celebrate their local hero. His high school coding club was watching from their computer lab, and his former teachers were sharing the stream with their current students. But the message that meant the most came from an unexpected source. Captain Miguel Rodriguez was in the audience, having flown to London specifically to hear Devon's speech. Rodriguez had become something of a hero himself in the aviation industry, and airlines around the world were implementing training programs based on his dignity protocol. Son, your flight changed more than just airline policies. It changed how an entire industry thinks about justice. Proud to be here to witness your next chapter, Rodriguez's text read. Devon walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. The audience rose to their feet before he said a single word. In the front row, Google's executive team smiled with pride at their youngest advisor. In the fifth row, Maria Santos, the tech journalist who had documented the original incident, was recording every moment for a feature documentary about corporate change in America. "Thank you, Devon," said into his wireless microphone, his voice steady and confident. 3 months ago, I was a 17-year-old kid from Queens with a dream and a laptop. Tonight, I'm standing before you as proof that innovation comes from the most unexpected places, and that dignity matters more than any algorithm we could ever code. The audience listened intently as Devon shared his journey from coding in his bedroom to building CipherBridge, his AI platform that was now being used in schools across 30 countries. But the heart of his speech focused on the night that had changed everything. On Flight 447, I learned that success isn't just about what you achieve. It's about how you respond when someone tries to tear you down. It's about maintaining your values when others abandon theirs. And it's about using your platform to lift up others who might be facing the same challenges you overcame. Devon announced that he was using a significant portion of his Google acquisition money to establish the Flight 447 Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing coding education and mentorship to underserved youth around the world. The foundation had already received commitments from major tech companies to fund programs in 50 cities. "We're not just teaching kids to code," Devon explained. "We're teaching them that their background doesn't determine their future. We're showing them that innovation thrives when we include voices that have been traditionally excluded from these spaces." The applause was deafening. But Devon had one more surprise for his audience. "I'd like to bring someone special onto this stage," Devon announced. "The man who showed me that authority means nothing without integrity. Please welcome Captain Miguel Rodriguez." Rodriguez walked onto the stage wearing his full uniform, his 4 gold captain stripes gleaming under the bright lights. The audience erupted again as the two men embraced. Rodriguez had become a symbol of moral leadership in the aviation industry, and his presence at the Tech Summit represented the bridge between different sectors united by shared values. "Captain Rodriguez didn't just save my flight that night," Devon told the audience. "He saved my faith in humanity. He showed me that there are people in positions of power who will use that power to protect dignity rather than preserve prejudice." Rodriguez took the microphone briefly to address the audience. "Devon Martinez taught me something important that night. He taught me that grace under pressure isn't about staying calm when things are easy. It's about maintaining your character when everything around you is trying to break it. This young man has more integrity at 18 than most people develop in a lifetime." As the keynote concluded and Devon left the stage, social media exploded with praise for his speech and the announcement of his foundation. The hashtag Dignity in Tech began trending globally as tech workers shared their own stories of overcoming bias and discrimination in the industry. But the most significant response came from an unexpected quarter. Victoria Ashford, who had been released from federal prison after serving 6 months for making false terrorism reports, published a handwritten letter in the New York Times. I have spent 3 months in prison and 3 years in therapy trying to understand how I became the person who terrorized an innocent teenager on Flight 447. Victoria wrote, I realize now that I was so invested in protecting a system that privileged people like me that I couldn't see the humanity in people like Devon Martinez. His grace in forgiving me has been more powerful than any punishment the justice system could impose. Victoria's letter went on to announce that she was dedicating her remaining years to working with the Flight 447 Foundation, using her experience as a cautionary tale in diversity and inclusion training programs. I can't undo the harm I caused, she concluded, but I can spend the rest of my life ensuring that no other young person faces what Devon faced because of ignorance and prejudice disguised as concern. Devon's response to Victoria's letter was characteristically gracious. Redemption is possible for everyone, he told reporters. Mrs. Ashford's willingness to examine her own biases and change her behavior shows that people can grow. That's exactly the kind of transformation we're trying to create with the foundation. The transformation extended far beyond individual stories. Airlines had implemented comprehensive anti-discrimination training. Tech companies had revised their hiring practices to actively seek diverse talent. Schools were incorporating Devon's story into their curricula as an example of how young people could overcome adversity through education and perseverance. But perhaps the most meaningful change was happening in communities like Devon's neighborhood in Queens, where young people were starting coding clubs, launching their own apps, and applying for tech internships with the confidence that their background was an asset rather than a liability. As Devon returned to his hotel room after the conference, he video-called his mother to share the day's events. Maria Martinez was still surrounded by family and neighbors who had watched the keynote live. "Baby, your grandmother would be so proud," Maria said, tears streaming down her face. "She always said you were destined for something special. But I don't think even she could have imagined this." Devon looked out at the London skyline, thinking about the journey that had brought him from a bedroom in Queens to a stage in front of the world's tech leaders. The path had been challenging, sometimes painful, but ultimately transformative. "Mom, I've been thinking about what comes next," Devon said. "Google wants me to move to Silicon Valley, but I think I want to stay in Queens. I want to build the foundation's headquarters right in our neighborhood. I want kids from our community to see that they don't have to leave home to change the world. They can change the world from exactly where they are." 3 months after Flight 447 changed everything, Devon Martinez had become more than just a successful entrepreneur. He had become a symbol of how individual courage and character could create ripple effects that transformed entire industries and communities. The flight that was supposed to take 8 hours had ended up changing countless lives, and the young man who had been questioned for sitting in first class was now showing the world that true first-class treatment meant ensuring dignity and opportunity for everyone. 1 year later, Devon Martinez found himself back in seat 2A of a flight from JFK to London, but everything had changed. The 18-year-old was no longer an unknown teenager with a dream. He was Time magazine's Young Innovator of the Year and the founder of a global foundation that had already trained over 10,000 young programmers from underserved communities. As Devon settled into the familiar first-class suite, he was surprised to see Captain Miguel Rodriguez approaching from the cockpit. Rodriguez wasn't scheduled to fly this route, but he'd specifically requested to captain Devon's 1-year anniversary flight. "Mr. Martinez," Rodriguez said with a warm smile, "it's an honor to have you flying with us again." "How does it feel to be back in 2A? Devon grinned, looking around the cabin that had become the site of both his worst nightmare and greatest triumph. "Like coming full circle, Captain. But this time I'm not just carrying my own dreams. I'm carrying the dreams of thousands of kids who are watching to see what's possible." As other passengers boarded, Devon noticed something that would have been impossible a year ago. The first-class cabin was remarkably diverse. A young Latina engineer was settling into 1A, heading to London to announce her renewable energy startup. A black teenager not much older than Devon was in 1F, traveling to Oxford for a quantum computing conference. An elderly Sikh gentleman in traditional dress was reviewing presentation slides for a tech summit. The transformation wasn't accidental. The dignity protocol that Captain Rodriguez had pioneered had evolved into industry-wide changes that went beyond just handling discrimination. Airlines had partnered with organizations like Devon's Foundation to provide travel opportunities for young innovators who might never have been able to afford first-class tickets. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking," Rodriguez announced as the aircraft pushed back from the gate. "I want to welcome all passengers aboard this special anniversary flight. Exactly 1 year ago, this aircraft carried a remarkable young man whose courage and character changed our industry forever. Today, we are proud to continue that legacy of dignity, inclusion, and respect for every passenger." The cabin applauded, but Devon was focused on something else. As the aircraft taxied toward the runway, he noticed a familiar figure in the airport terminal. Victoria Ashford was working at a customer service desk wearing a simple airline uniform and helping passengers with their travel questions. Victoria had completed her community service and federal probation, but had chosen to continue working at JFK Airport as part of her personal transformation. She'd started in baggage claim and worked her way up to passenger services, determined to spend her remaining years helping travelers rather than judging them. Through the window, Victoria looked up as Flight 447 taxied past her terminal. For a moment, her eyes met Devon's through the aircraft window. She placed her hand over her heart and nodded slightly, a gesture of respect and gratitude that spoke louder than any words could. Devon nodded back, then turned to his laptop to review the speech he would give tomorrow at the Global Diversity and Technology Summit. The theme was From Turbulence to Transformation: How Crisis Becomes Catalyst for Change. As Flight 447 reached cruising altitude, Devon reflected on the journey that had brought him back to this seat. The Google acquisition had been just the beginning. His AI platform was now being used in refugee camps to teach coding skills to displaced youth. His foundation had opened learning centers in urban neighborhoods around the world. Major tech companies had collectively pledged over $500 million to support inclusive innovation programs. But the most meaningful change was happening in individual lives. Devon regularly received messages from young people who had been inspired by his story to pursue their own dreams despite facing discrimination or doubt. 3 years ago, I was told I was too young, too poor, and too different to succeed in tech, wrote Aisha, a 16-year-old from Detroit who had just launched her own app. Your story showed me that obstacles are just opportunities in disguise. I used to be ashamed of my accent and my background, wrote Carlos, a college freshman from El Paso, who had received a full scholarship to MIT. Now I know my unique perspective is exactly what the tech world needs. Devon's phone buzzed with a message from his mother, who was now the executive director of community outreach for the Flight 447 Foundation. "Baby, I'm watching the news. They're interviewing kids from your first coding camp in Queens. They all say you taught them that their zip code doesn't determine their future. I'm so proud of who you've become." As the aircraft began its descent into London, Captain Rodriguez made one final announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, as we prepare for landing, I want to leave you with a thought. A year ago, one passenger's courage to maintain dignity under pressure changed how our entire industry thinks about respect and inclusion. Today, we challenge each of you to carry that spirit forward. Treat everyone you meet with the dignity you'd want for yourself. Stand up for justice when you see injustice. And remember that character is defined not by how you act when things are easy, but by how you respond when everything seems to be falling apart." Devon closed his laptop and looked around the cabin one more time. The diverse group of passengers represented something that hadn't existed a year ago, a visible demonstration that excellence comes from everywhere, that innovation thrives when barriers are removed, and that first-class treatment should be based on how we treat each other, not on the price of our tickets. As Flight 447 touched down at London Heathrow, Devon prepared for another day of changing the world. But he carried with him the lesson that had been learned in this very cabin, that sometimes the most important journeys don't take you to new destinations. Sometimes they take you back to where you started, but with the wisdom to see everything differently. The flight that had begun with hatred and suspicion had evolved into a symbol of hope and transformation. The teenager who had been accused of not belonging had created a world where everyone belonged, and the aircraft that had been the site of discrimination had become a laboratory for dignity. Devon Martinez's story didn't end when Flight 447 reached London. It continued in every coding camp that opened in an underserved neighborhood. It continued in every airline policy that protected passenger dignity. It continued in every young person who looked at his example and realized that their background was not a barrier but a bridge to something greater. The lesson of Flight 447 was simple, but powerful. Dignity is not something you buy with a first-class ticket. It's something you earn by how you treat other human beings. And when one person chooses courage over comfort, truth over prejudice, and grace over revenge, they don't just change their own story. They change the world. What would you have done in Devon's shoes? Would you have kept your cool or let anger take control? Drop your thoughts below. If this story reminded you that character matters more than class, hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to remember that dreams have no expiration date and dignity has no price tag. Because the next story of transformation might just be your own.